Helping organize the conference has been a planning committee, which included Julia Braungart-Rieker, who you've heard from earlier, and Lee Gettler, who you hear from tomorrow, I think, and then Laura Miller, who is going to do the next introduction, who is an assistant professor of psychology here at Notre Dame. Laura?
Okay, hello everyone. It is my pleasure to introduce our next speaker, Dr. Mary McMullen, who is a professor of curriculum studies and early childhood education and the associate chair of the Department of Curriculum and Instruction at Indiana University. She's worked in a teenage parent program and has taught parenting skills to women who have lost custody of their children through the court system. She has also worked as a practitioner with infant, toddlers, and 3 to 5-year-old children and directed a preschool program. Her work covers the areas of early childhood practitioners' beliefs as they relate to practice, perspectives on the quality of early childhood practice, as quality is conceptualized by differing cultures and within varying contexts. She works on relationship-based systems of care and conceptualizing well-being. She also works to understand factors that impact the well-being of babies, families, and professional caregivers in birth to 3 group care settings. So, welcome.
Thank you. Okay, well, I was just saying to Darsha, and thank you, Darsha, and thank you, everybody who helped put this together. This is like the time of the day that I'm sort of going, phew. So I might have to have some engagement from you at some point and ask you a few questions to get you up and to keep me up. So let me first say, give a nod to one of my doctoral students who is an art education early childhood person who designed what is actually a piece of art that I took a not so great picture of. But I'd like to acknowledge Diana Huxhold. As my title suggests, I am going to speak to you today about moral and ethical concerns related to infant-toddler care and caregivers. And I'm broadening the term caregiver, and I want to make clear that when I say caregiver, I'm talking about all of us in society who care for the needs, interests of those youngest citizens in our midst. Primarily, though, today I'm going to talk a lot about well-being in the context of group care settings. And so I'll try to make clearer as I go along. But typically when I use the word caregiver of infants and toddlers, I mean all of us and whatever our roles are. I've been in this field for a number of years, and as you heard, I've had a number of roles. For the past 20 years, I've been an academic at Indiana University. And I've been on a journey from the time that I started as a graduate student until now, in which I've really tried to pull apart what it means to provide quality care in support of children and families. So when I shorthand what I do, you heard kind of a long version, and my Vita is 1,000,000 pages, but when I shorthand to people what I do, I say that I work to support families in optimizing the healthy growth, overall growth, development, learning, and well-being of infants and toddlers. So, and I kind of picture it here as the family, peers, group caregivers, and the baby in the center, those people that I'm going to talk about today that are in a caregiving setting, in a group care setting. I know everything is well when I see it. I've spent 32 years now in and out of infant care programs. Those of you who've been in them, you probably can acknowledge too, you know everything's going well when you see it, when you experience it. Sights and sounds are pleasurable. There's a low, busy hum of noise. It doesn't smell bad. You know, just your body relaxes. All those hormones, fight or flight kinds of responses are not firing. Everybody's engaged. But I needed to drill down over the years on further. What is really going on here? Just as you know it when you see it, you know its absence. I call this picture the starfish babies. I spent some time in this room, and you know, I'm heavy as it is, but I gained 10 pounds when I was there. Drank too much, ate a lot of chocolate. It was a really hard experience to be in this room. This was a typical scene in this room. You can see, well, this isn't about this room, but you know it when it's not present. You know that there's not well-being. When I was in this room, it smelled bad the moment you walked in the room. That mix of dirty diapers and cleaning fluid. The sounds of screaming and crying babies left unattended. You know, the just chaotic, dirty, disorganized spaces throughout the rooms. You knew this was not a place of wellness, okay? And I just wanted to point out, these were the toys set out for these children at that time, okay? Do they look like they're ready for waffle blocks? But it was on the schedule, so therefore. Okay, so basically I'm going to go through very quickly what are known as best practices in the field of early childhood education, because I realize not everybody here is in early childhood education. I'm not going to dwell on this very long, but I am going to hit on some of the ones that relate to the concept of well-being that I will articulate a little later on. And focusing on what I know matters. You know, think back 2 pictures ago. Think back 1 picture ago. What are some things that I have learned based on what is known in the field really matters? I describe these as holistic, inclusive, relationship-based perspective, the perspective. All babies and all families matter. Now, many things fit under this concept. Of course, all babies matter, whether they're typically developing, exceptionally developing, whether they have some disabling condition, a chronic ailment, doesn't matter. I often talk to I'm a teacher educator. I prepare future teachers and I work with teachers in the field, and I'll often say something like, you must be ready for every baby that walks, crawls, is carried, or is wheeled into your classroom. They don't have to be ready for you, and neither do their families. So it's a different take on readiness. We need to be ready for each and every one of the families that comes to us. So this is a basic founding principle in early childhood education. It's very different than what you hear about elementary education. It goes along, you know, so many of the things that I might say today go along really well with what the first 3 speakers said. Because especially this next thing that I'm thinking about, this also gets to the family-centered principle that is foundational to our field, which goes along with what Dr. Sparrow was saying. Family competence is acknowledged. Family expertise in a family-centered model is acknowledged. The early childhood educator, the early childhood caregiver understands they have a certain amount of expertise. They have a certain amount of learning and knowledge they've gained through their years of preparation and maybe through years of practice. But it is the parent's knowledge. It is the parent's understanding of the child that has to meet with them to guide the child's future, to guide the child's daily work, play, and learning. So the family-centered model is not family involvement. It is not families being included. It is families and caregivers together making decisions and setting goals. Fundamental to the field. Supportive, caring relationships matter. We've heard, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, although I could have, but it's the whole conference. We're talking about supportive relationships. Picture this as the old African proverb, it takes a village. And I think that message has been made over and over again today. Here's one that I think is highly important, and anybody in early childhood education recognizes this founding principle. We are built, some of our foundational knowledge is basic child development research, basic child development theory, but from that, we are grounded in the notion that you cannot just look at a single piece of a child. You have to look at the whole picture. You have to look at the whole context of the child. You have to know about her family. You have to know that she has probably has an assistive device. You have to know that she has a disabling condition. You have to know that, wow, she seems to be happy and content, mostly at home, but maybe she's not at school and in your program. You have to know so much more about her. You cannot just maybe look at her score on the Peabody and know how well her receptive language is or something like that to understand this child. Founding principle. The past, present, and future, along with this notion of the holistic principle matters. Everything that came before in this child's life, and our first speaker, Dr. Perry, really hit on this too, when he was talking about the ACEs data. Knowing what came before, understanding the impact of everything that happens in the early years during pregnancy. Was there a high-resourced environment in which the woman was pregnant? Was she receiving health care? All these things that came before you become caregiver or you take on responsibility for a child matters. The present matters. We'll talk more about the present in a few minutes, but let me say about the future. In this techno age that we're in, and Americans in general, I know we have a Canadian or two and some very famous person from Scotland, but Americans in general tend to be highly future-oriented. We are always worried about how this kid's going to turn out, whether they're ready for first grade, whether they're ready for high school, whether they'll get into the best college. And we're always thinking about the next thing. An early childhood educator keeps in mind what came before, who this child is today. Is she going to have a good day today? Is she having a good moment now? As well as, I've got to think about her learning and being challenged and growing to the next stage. So, something to keep in mind. Also, I just really like that picture, don't you? I think it's really nice. Okay, so I'm taking all these things together, my 30 years in the field and studies I've done on continuity and primary caregiving and many other things. I've been putting together a model, the beginnings of a model. You'll see it progress through the next few minutes of that's getting us closer to what well-being is all about. So I say that thus infants and toddlers in group care need policies, practices, structures that support caring environments, caring experiences, and caring relationships. All that needs to be spinning around them. Okay, all that has to be present for them to be and feel well. More like that first picture of care that I showed you than the second. Okay? But again, what is well-being? So I say that my understanding of well-being continues to grow, and my understanding continues, my search for what well-being is and means in the context of care has led me to understand that well-being has a central place in understanding quality, the quality of those experiences, relationships, the quality of the environments that we set up for these children. But consider this. How many of us fly? Almost everybody, right? How many times have you heard this or something like it? In case it becomes necessary to use oxygen masks, and you are traveling with a small child, put on your own mask and then put on your child's. Why? Why? You won't pass out. So you can help the child. Is this a selfish response? No, who matters in this first? The adult, the caregiver, right? Doesn't mean the child doesn't matter. But if you're going to be able to have the capacity to help the child, that caregiver in this case needs to be receiving oxygen, be wide awake, be physically able to respond, and be mentally alert enough to respond. So I know that, that we already saw a version of this earlier, but I've been encouraged by the young woman I was sitting next to go ahead and show my version too, because it's a little bit different. And I'm going to focus on the capacity of the caregiver to respond. So it's a short video, but again, it's and this one's from Edward Tronick. How do I, where's my young man? How do I click on the, let's see. Maybe I just do it the old-fashioned way. Is that working?
Babies this young are extremely responsive to
Not very
the
loud,
emotions and the reactivity and the social interaction that they get from the world around them. This is something that we started studying 30, 40 years ago, when people didn't think that infants could engage in social interaction. In the still face experiment, what the mother did was she sits down and she's playing with her baby who's about a year of age.
I'm like a girl. Oh.
And and their intentions, what they want to do in the world. And that's really what the baby is used to. And then we ask the mother to not respond to the baby. The baby very quickly picks up on this. And then she uses all of her abilities to try and get the mother back. She smiles at the mother. She points because she's used to the mother looking where she points. The baby puts both hands up in front of her and says, "What's happening here?"
Okay, becoming
She
disorganized,
makes that
disengaging.
screechy sound at the mother, like, "Come on, why aren't we doing this?" Even in this 2 minutes, when they don't get the normal reaction, they react with negative emotions, they turn away, they feel the stress of it. They actually may lose control of their posture because of the stress that they're experiencing.
Okay. I'm here. And what are you doing? Oh, yes. Oh, would it be
Phew.
fair?
It's a little
Okay,
like
I'm going
the
to
good,
stop
the
it
bad, and
here.
the ugly.
He goes on for
Good.
a while. I want you to think about this in terms of what we know about, what we've heard today, but what we know about capacity to care. Think about studies that you've probably all heard about, you've read, about maternal depression. Think of the mother that we saw in Dr. Sparrow's video that had depression before and how they were working with her to help her connect with her baby. I remarked when he was talking about the pride, the smile, that wonderful look on her face when she was being shown these capabilities that her baby had. Would she have been that way if she had just gone into depression, had somebody intervene? Think about joint attention studies, those of you who study autism. These early connections, these early signs that the baby is aware of what he or she is saying. And then finally, I think of sensitive responsiveness, and those of us in early childhood in particular study timeliness of response and appropriate level of response in terms of when we're engaged with what we call the dance of communication between caregiver and baby. And so many things come to the fore when we're thinking about just the capacity to respond. And so thus I take all of these things together and I assert, and it's not a bold assertion, that if we desire well-being for babies in care, we must ensure well-being in their adult caregivers. Okay, so these two things go hand in hand. We can't just work with infants and toddlers or very young children. We must work with those who are their primary or key caregivers. So my model is evolving a little bit here. So I still got caring relationships, experiences, and environments kind of swirling around, but I've put the baby and one of her caregivers in this circle. So infants and toddlers and their caregivers in group care need policies, practices, and structures that support these key things. But I still don't really know how we do that. I'm moving closer. So I consider supporting a model for well-being. I look to the existing scholarship. Let me make sure I'm where I'm supposed to be. Okay, one of the things we know about well-being is we throw this term around a lot. It's not just that we throw it around, we use it intentionally. We talk about spiritual well-being. Medical doctors talk about your physical well-being. Your psychologist or psychiatrist might talk about your emotional well-being. I don't know, do you guys talk about emotional well-being? Maybe you do. We talk about, your financial analyst might talk about your financial well-being, okay? We all sort of, because of the context, have an understanding of what that is. But because it's used in so many literatures and in so many different ways, here we've been talking, without really saying it, relational well-being. So what does this mean, and how do we enforce it? So I started looking from examining all my personal experience and started building a theoretical framework about this. I started with the relationship-based care literature, a lot of it looking at attachment theory. In fact, Professor Trevarthen is here in the audience. He's one of the people that I've examined in some of the older attachment literature. Some of the literature related to continuity of care. My own most recent study was on continuity of care practices, and for those of you unfamiliar with that term, the way I'm using it is that the programs that I examined, infants and toddlers from the time they were about 6 or 8 weeks old in caregiving settings were kept with the same 2 lead caregivers in a program for 3.5 years. And also all of the other caregivers, the assistant caregivers, and usually substitute teachers remained the same over that long period of time. I looked at the experience of the caregivers, and I looked at the parents' responses to that form of care. So continuity of care literature, Alice Honig's work, a lot of the work that deals directly with relationship-based caregiving. What am I doing wrong? Sorry. Where's my guy? Okay, there. I'm surprised it's not doing a whole lot of others. But okay, so then I also looked at systems theory. We saw a little example of that on Dr. Sparrow's, one of his slides, where he showed school systems, community systems, like cultural systems with the circular model, the spheres. I used this is a model from Uri Bronfenbrenner. It's a bioecological systems that helps inform the idea that ever-increasing spheres of relationships from primary, secondary, tertiary kinds of spheres of influence in terms of the relationships on that infant. In my case, I do babies with their caregivers and their parents or their families. How does that impact the development? Dyadic care theories, in particular people like Nell Noddings, who look at the influence of the relationship between the carer and the person cared for, and what it means in that relationship. In the case of Nell Noddings, she talks a lot about engrossment, and that Nell would talk about how the needs or the, anybody a Nell Noddings reader? Yeah, what's the word she uses? The motivations of the cared for become the motivations of the carer. And so she talks a lot about the power dynamic. Caring for the many. Bill Johnston, Carrie Bazzelli, and several others have now engaged in following up on Nell Noddings' work and talking about when you get beyond the party of two, when you're going beyond carer and cared for, what happens when the caregiver cares for many, and the complexity of those relationships. And they talk about the moral dynamics of it. You have a moral imperative to meet the needs of each one of the cared for. General well-being models. I've read and followed closely Martin Seligman's work on Flourish, which is not highly, I guess could be criticized for not being terribly theoretically based, but it was very interesting. Looked at Ross Thompson's work, who really talks about the caring structures that we set up for children and caregivers. Rosemary Roberts' work, where she indicates that babies have it's like a matter of their rights as citizens in a global society for us to take care of them, their well-being. Caregiver well-being, directly. I look to Kathleen Gooch and Sasha Powell, colleagues in Great Britain, and who talk a lot about how the actual satisfaction of the caregiver matters in the kind of care that they will give to the ones cared for, the infants and toddlers with whom they work. Satisfaction, their own sense of efficacy, their own sense of contribution, and things like this. So altogether, and I also look at the care, I started my roots in very early, as an early researcher, I'm kind of returning to it, in caregiver burnout and job satisfaction. So that's got me where I am now. To a definition that well-being in group care is a state of being. It's a state of being for adult caregivers and babies in group care in which they feel and are generally well overall in terms of physical and psychological health and safety, emotional stability and soundness, and they experience general satisfaction in the activities and relationships within the group. Okay? An easy way to say it. It's just a state of being and feeling well. So I went all through all this stuff for 30 years to get to, it's just a state of being and feeling well. But, is it? What goes into that? So now my model's growing. We still got the lady in the middle. We still got her pushing a carriage. We still got her being supported by caring relationships, caring experiences, caring environments. We know those things are important. But now, out of the literature, out of my own research on continuity, out of my own research in what it means to be an infant in childcare, and out of other studies, we can identify different senses of being, senses of feeling that accompany well-being that need to be present in order for the caregiver and the baby to feel and be well. So I call these 9 senses of well-being. And they come from evidence, from studies, from literature. It's not necessarily a complete list. It might be too many, it might be too few. Still working on that. But let's go through them and see what you think of them. Okay, and see how you connect with them, you as adults. But I also want you to put yourself in the mind of being a baby or having a baby, your own baby, grandbaby, grandniece or nephew. Think as an adult, but also think as a baby. And then I want you to think, does it matter? Do these things I identify matter, whether you are 18 months old or 55? Yes, I'm 55. Or 83, okay? So the first one, sense of contentment. What do I mean by a sense of contentment? I'm going to ask you first to tell me, what do you need to feel content? Oh, there you go. Thank you, Professor. But you may want to save that for my next one's security. But yeah, okay. Any other contents? How do you feel content?
Basic needs are met.
Your basic needs are met. Any other contentments? Picture yourself.
Warm fire with a glass of wine.
Warm fire, glass of wine. That's where I went, only I also have a book with me. And my dog is curled up at my feet, okay? So what is that feeling, though? That's what you're doing. That's where you are, and you're feeling content, right? Because you feel your needs are met. Peace. Peace. Okay, so I talk about it as you're in an organized space. Maybe there's not a lot of clutter. Maybe these are my ideas. But it's comfortable. Okay, aesthetically pleasing, maybe even beautiful, but it's pleasing. It's peaceful. Okay, I had some other things down here. We feel relaxed, at ease. Okay, the emotional climate is even. Okay, does that sound like contentment to you? Okay, and why wouldn't it to a baby? Don't you think that would to a baby? Look at the beauty of, I think this is an aesthetically pleasing space. Looks like a calm moment. Okay? Picture of contentment. Sense of security. Now don't you wish you had saved your but it could work here too, right? What makes you feel secure? Feel safe.
Being in the presence of an attachment figure.
Yay! Thank you. Predictability. Familiarity. I think she looks like she feels secure, don't you? I put, she's in a place of trust. She feels safe. She feels healthy. Somebody is responding to her needs, right? Very Ericksonian in that sense. You know, that Erickson's basic sense of trust versus mistrust. Predictability, yet I would add, and we so much hit this in early childhood, responsive to the individual's needs. So it's not so routine and to be inflexible. You know, so it'd be individually responsive. Sense of affinity. Do you know what I mean by affinity? Closeness, love. What does it take for you to feel affinity? Any guesses on this one? You have what kind of relationships? Healthy relationships. When do you feel affinity? Warm fire in a glass. And probably somebody with you, though, right?
Right, with a partner.
With a partner, okay. I'd like to think. Other things that make you feel affinity? Yes? Somebody loves you unconditionally, right? Okay. Those are great. Some of the things I put, you have a sense of belonging. There's warmth and affection being shown. Physical, often physical. There's friendship, collegiality, a pat on the back, a warm hug. I caution this. When I've talked about affinity with some audiences, especially with audiences that are involved in early intervention, and I'm thinking about Christine, you have to be cautious with physical touch. Again, it's an individual response thing. For some children, that would send them over the edge. So, somebody say something? Go ahead. Oh, sorry, I thought I heard somebody. But for the most part, it's feeling loved, feeling that you're part of a community, feeling that you belong. How is it different for a baby versus an adult in that environment? You're the adult caregiver working there. Don't you need to feel a sense of being in that community? That you have colleagues and friends? That there's some warmth and affection? Right? Anybody arguing with that? We can argue later if you want to. But let's do it over wine. Sense of self-respect. When do you feel self-respect? How do you feel? What is it? When do you feel self-respect? What does it take for you to feel self-respect? You have to feel competent at something. But more than that, if you're competent at it, that's good. But what else has to happen, do you think? Say it loud. Feeling heard. Okay, so maybe somebody has to recognize that. Hear it, see it. Feeling felt? Is that what you said? You have to feel like somebody else notices, right? Right. So it's respect for me. Not only me, who else? My mom and dad, maybe? My grandma? Even my drunk Uncle Joe? Drunk Uncle Joe comes in my stories a lot. But he needs to be respected. He's part of my family. Okay, you need to have a sense, people need to be surrounded by a sense of dignity, honor, that they are valued and respected, that their families are valued and respected. Their music is valued and respected. Their culture is valued and respected. And that they are included for their talents and the things that they bring. Sense of communication, and I particularly love this picture. So anybody who's seen me talk before, this is an old recycled picture. But this says communication to me in so many ways. But how do you feel? What is a sense of communication, and why do you think you need it to have well-being? Requires somebody else to be engaging with me. So there's that relationship element. Somebody said in the last one, I need to be heard. Understanding and being understood. In fact, I used this once in trying to describe to some of my students what intersubjectivity is. It's almost like they've created this new meaning for themselves. When you look at this male caregiver and the toddler, they don't only understand each other, they've almost created this space together, right? Do you need to feel that what you communicate is received by somebody? Do you think a baby does? How is it different? It's not, right? So what I have for this, we need people who mindfully engage with us. They're not thinking about their shopping list or what they're going to buy at Target on the way home. They need to be responsive. They need to meet us with the level of engagement that we met them with. They need to empathize, which I think this gentleman here was talking about. And we need to engage in meaningful conversation with children. We talk so much about, you know, the 30,000 words and surrounding children with language and da-da-da-da-da. We need to meaningfully engage in conversation with children, in dialogue back and forth. However, it can also be non-verbal. And I'm trying to see if I have time to do this video real fast, show you the power of nonverbal communication. There's supposed to be a YouTube up here. Does somebody notice it? See it real fast? Do you see it? He loaded a YouTube on the... would it be? Where is it? I paused it? Oh. How do I get Chrome open again? Where is Chrome? Is it this? Excuse me. Okay. I might need help getting my... That's not it. Oh. Okay, I'll do this real fast. I hope. Anyway, this is the visual cliff experiment, and many of you have seen this in your early child development classes, and it just makes a very powerful, I think it's this one, wasn't it? The one below, it's a little longer though. Oh no, that's a PowerPoint thing.
Emotion is a nonverbal.
Oh,
Did you tell me this?
Emotions reveal the cognition, the understanding of the baby. And furthermore, emotions are the nonverbal communication of the baby towards the parent and the parent towards the baby. Therefore, I thought that emotions were a royal road, one royal road, to the study of the baby's development.
In this study, babies between 9 and 12 months are brought into the lab and placed on a large plexiglass top table. Half of the table has a checkerboard pattern just underneath the surface.
That's not a real
But
drop-off.
halfway across is a visual cliff, which the baby can tell drops off steeply. The plexiglass top continues, so it's perfectly fine to proceed. But the baby isn't so sure. And this is a big drop for a baby just starting to crawl. She wants to get across to get the toy. But she's cautious and looks to the opposite end of the table where her mother is. The parent is instructed to smile or make a fear face.
If the mother is posing a fear face, the baby typically does not cross this stair-step downward, this modified visual cliff or visual step. On the other hand, if the mother poses a smile or somehow poses a nonverbal communication that is not prohibitive but encouraging, the child is much more likely to cross over to her. This particular study demonstrates the role of nonverbal communication in determining the child's behavior in uncertain contexts. A baby will, when they encounter something ambiguous, something uncertain, will typically look to the significant other, the mother, the father, a grandparent, the caregiver in order to figure out what to do. So by 11 to 12 months of age, the baby is already doing what all of us do when something unusual happens. We look around to figure out how.
I'm sorry to stop it, but I'm running out of time. Is this me? No. How do I get back? Somebody, oh, Notre Dame? I guess that's us, huh? Okay. If I only had a Mac, huh, guys? Okay. Sense of engagement. I'm going to go through these a little more rapidly now. But sense of engagement. For a second, though, I want you to picture the most boring time in your life. And don't say now, please. But the most boring job you've had. Think about what was missing, what was not there. And remember those starfish babies. Okay, when we think about engagement. Okay, we all need interesting things to do. We need time to focus on those interesting things, whether it's work, play, learning, doing, making, whatever it is. We need intellectual and physical challenge. That's a theme that I heard earlier today, too. We need to be engaged. We need to have access to resources in which to engage. Contribution. This overlaps with self-efficacy. With efficacy, I'm going to do in a minute, and with the notions of identity I talked about earlier. But it's a little different. Here I'm talking about that we recognize the talents, but we also assign roles and give responsibility to little tiny children and to the caregivers. Caregivers need to have something important in order to feel that they are engaged and belong and are contributing and are doing something meaningful and are not just taken for granted. Sense of efficacy. Look at this 2.5-year-old. Okay? Look how strong she feels, or it looks like she feels. Think about how you feel when you feel efficacious. What else is happening? What does it take to make you feel that way? You feel satisfied and confident and competent. Maybe you don't make your goal exactly, but maybe somebody's encouraging you. Maybe you're on the way, on the path to a goal. Maybe somebody is celebrating your successes along the way, your milestones. They're encouraging you rather than discouraging you. And then finally, sense of agency. We all need to feel empowered, whether we are 10 months old and making choices about the board book that we want to read, or we are 55-year-olds who are trying to make decisions about our own classrooms. And we need to have voice. We need to feel that we can participate in decision-making and goal setting. I found this very powerfully came out for me with a study with a group of teachers and directors who they had varying levels of control in the systems in which they were in. You need choice. So again, these things all taken together, I have a final, I'm going to end it with that, but let me go through just a couple benefits. The benefits of well-being tend to show in the literature as adding consistency. This is a revolving door. Rather than losing teachers and caregivers to our programs, they tend to stay longer. There seems to be a protective effect of when there is general well-being. Well-being is described as a general state. You are not always feeling all these things consistently. It's sort of like you're not, even if you're an optimistic person, you're not always positive, right? So we go for trying to achieve a general sense of well-being, that you are generally feeling efficacious. You are generally feeling that you are contributing. Well, if you are generally in this state of well-being, we find that you can weather the storms, the boo-boos, the disruptions in your life a little better. Finally, not finally, but almost, enjoyment in life. You tend to be, I hesitate to use the word happy, but Seligman did a little bit. You tend to be happier. And I had one other slide. Oh, it's gone. In the words of Horton. Anybody know who Horton is? Horton's an elephant. Who's elephant? Dr. Seuss. Does anybody remember one of his famous quotes is, "A person's a person no matter how small." I take a human rights perspective on well-being, and whether you are 2 years old or 83 years old, I think we should be working towards the well-being of those in our global community just because it's right. It's the right thing to do. And we really don't have time to discuss my question, but if anybody has okay, if anybody wants to or has a question, you can. We have 5 minutes. Thank you.
One little question is, you talked about caring for the caregivers, and how do we care for caregivers in the United States when they're paid less than garbage collectors or zookeepers? And less than bicycle mechanics and parking lot attendants. Well, you and I, sir, need to work in everything that we can do as caregivers of the caregivers to vote, to work with our politicians, to lobby Congress, to work within our own state systems, to work within campaigns that market the idea to the general public that this matters. I'm hearing more talk on radio shows and newspapers and even from the president and others about how those first years matter. But I'm not hearing a lot of what is it going to take to get us there. Even in universal preschool, they're not talking about necessarily having 2 preschool teachers, which we know it takes to have in each classroom in a preschool. So we all have to work on that, every one of us.
Can I add to the low pay the importance of accessibility to education in early childhood?
Yes.
In South Bend, we don't have a whole lot of opportunities or possibilities for getting a BA degree in early childhood education or a master's. And so this is a continuing challenge to the university system to keep thinking about raising that importance.
I'm waiting. I'm glad you brought that up because earlier in all my notes in front of me, and I didn't say it, one of my real goals is accessibility, affordability, and quality. We talk about it as the trilemma in our field. And that is definitely a moral and ethical concern. But today, and I haven't gotten a hold of it, 2 of our teachers and one of my doctoral students was interviewed by the Washington Post about exactly this issue. And one of the students is 2 of the students interviewed are former undergrads who've worked for the last year as preschool teachers. And they have student loans and they have bachelor's degrees and, you know, all that decision about do we stay or do we go? You know, we owe all this money. We can't ever make any more money than, you know, $22,000 a year or whatever we're making. And these are battles that we have to, back to the first gentleman's question, these are things we're going to have to work on as a society. New Zealand has parity for their preschool teachers or their birth to 5 teachers. They are paid at the same rate and compensated at the same level that the public school teachers kindergarten through 12th grade are. You know, I know New Zealand is this big and we're this big, but if they can do it, why can't we begin doing it, at least in some of our states? So, Miss?
Similar to you, I educate educators, and I'm seeing an increasing number of students that are coming in with mental health issues, and I'm wondering if you have ideas on how do we support the well-being of our students so that it can trickle down into their care with children.
So you're saying some of the people that come in as undergrads have mental health issues?
So I teach in 2 programs, so a diploma for early childhood educators and a degree program as well. And so I'm just wondering if there are ways that you're infusing this idea of well-being for the students that you're teaching.
I think it's rougher now. As I said, I've been teaching for 20 years at the university. I do see more young undergraduate students who are seem to be suffering more stress. I certainly see more who are taking antipsychotics as well as antidepressants, taking sleeping pills, all kinds of things that I did not see 20 years ago. You know, so those kinds of things worry me. We do a lot of counseling of the students. We do a lot of wellness support with our students. And finally, in the end, sometimes we have to advise students out of the program if it's just not. Teaching is a high stress position. It is a very difficult position. And I think some people underestimate how difficult that's going to be. and you couple that with the low compensation and the low valuing of it in society. And other than being very mindful as teacher educators of the mental health of our students, I will say one other thing, that we have a cohort model where we follow our students for 2.5 years. So I know them intimately. I mean, I know them really well. So, and so do my colleagues. So I know this group of 22, mostly women, really well. So I know when something's wrong. And that's one way to deal with some of that.
Thank you.
I don't know if I answered that question, but okay. Yep.